Hi, welcome back to my podcast. In this episode, I want to explore why helping someone build their perception often creates more lasting change than simply telling them what to do, and why understanding how we see matters more than being told what to fix. I want to start this episode with something I've learned over time. Advice isn't useless. In fact, a lot of advice that I've given as well as received actually works. But I've noticed something interesting. The same advice can help one person completely change their life and do almost nothing, if not the total opposite, for someone else. And that's what led me here. The difference usually isn't the advice itself. It's the way someone is perceiving their situation, themselves, and or their options. Advice can give direction, but perception determines whether the direction even feels possible. So let me start with what I've been noticing. I give someone advice, something practical, something that genuinely works, and sometimes they take it and things shift. Other times they nod, they agree, maybe even say that makes sense, and then nothing happens. And for a long time, I thought maybe the advice wasn't clear enough, or maybe I needed to explain it differently. But the more I sat there with it, the more I realized it's not always about the advice because I've seen the exact same suggestion land differently depending on who's hearing it. One person hears set boundaries and feels relief. Another hears it and feels guilt or fear or like they're being told to do something impossible. Same words, different reception. And that difference is not random, it's rooted in how that person is currently seeing themselves, their situation, and what they believe is available to them. Okay, so let's pause and define something here. Advice is direction. It's a recommendation. It's someone saying, based on what I know, here's what I think would help. And that can be useful. I'm not dismissing advice. I give it all the time. Trust me. But advice assumes a few things. It assumes the person is emotionally ready to act. It assumes they trust themselves enough to try something new. It assumes they have some clarity about what matters to them. And when those things are in place, advice works beautifully. But when they're not, when someone is overwhelmed or doubting themselves or not even sure of what they want, advice can feel like noise or pressure or one more thing they're failing at. Because the issue isn't that they don't know what they want to do, it's that it doesn't feel possible yet. The difference between perspective and advice tells you what to do. Perspective shifts how you see the situation in the first place. Advice is external. Perspective is internal. And I think this is where a lot of well meaning support falls short. We keep offering people new strategies when what they actually need is a different lens. Let me give you an example. Someone tells you they're stuck in a relationship that doesn't feel right. The advice might be leave, set boundaries, communicate your needs. All of that could be valid. But if that person is seeing themselves as someone who doesn't deserve better, or who's responsible for the other person's happiness, or who can't trust their own feelings, none of that advice is going to land. Not because it's wrong, but because their perception isn't aligned with it yet. Perspective work would look different. It might sound like, what would it mean if your feelings were valid here? Or, what if leaving wasn't abandonment? What if it was self respect? You're not telling them what to do. You're offering them a different way of seeing themselves and their options. And when perception shifts, action often follows naturally. This is something that I noticed about why advice fails without the right lens. Here's the thing about advice. It only works if the person receiving it can actually integrate it. And integration requires a few things. It requires some level of self-trust. It requires emotional bandwidth. It requires a sense that change is possible and safe. Without those, advice doesn't get absorbed. It gets deflected, dismissed, or stored away as something you should do, but never will. And this isn't a character flaw. It's not laziness or resistance for the sake of it. It's that the internal system isn't ready yet. Think about it like this. If someone's nervous system is in survival mode, telling them to just relax doesn't work. Their body doesn't feel safe enough to relax. Same principles apply here. If someone's perception of themselves is, I always mess things up, then advice like, try this new approach, it might just reinforce that belief when it doesn't work perfectly the first time. So the advice isn't the problem, it's the lens. What changes when perception shifts? When someone's perception does actually shift, a few things happens. First, choices start to reorganize on their own. You don't have to convince someone to do something differently. They start seeing different options naturally. Second, motivation becomes internal. It's not about following someone else's instructions. It's about acting in alignment with how they now see themselves and their situation. Third, the change tends to stick because it's not imposed from the outside. It's integrated. This is why I think perspective work creates more sustainable change than repeated advice. Advice can spark action, but perspective creates the foundation for that action to feel coherent, meaningful, and self-directed. And this is a boundary worth naming. There's something else I want to touch on here because I think it's important. When you focus on giving perspective instead of advice, you're also respecting autonomy. You're not taking responsibility for someone else's choices. You're not positioning yourself as the one who has the answers. You're creating space for them to arrive at their own conclusion. And that distinction matters because when you're constantly giving advice, especially when it's not getting followed, it's easy to feel drained, frustrated, like you're carrying something that isn't yours to carry. But when you're offering perspective, you're inviting someone to think differently. What they do with that is up to them. You're not responsible for their progress. You're not failing if they don't change. You're just offering a different way of seeing, and that's enough. This is where support and boundaries can coexist. You can care without needing to fix. So here's where I'm landing with all of this. Advice has a place. I'm not saying it doesn't, but I think we've been overestimating its power and underestimating the importance of perception. If you've been giving advice that isn't landing, or if you've been receiving advice that doesn't seem to help, maybe the answer isn't better advice. Maybe it's a different way of seeing. Because once the lens shifts, the path forward often becomes clearer on its own. And that clarity, that's where real change begins.